The media just never portrays anything that's good for people, but we see it all the time. And as part of our First Nation LNG Alliance, that's what we do is advocate all the good things that is happening to our communities.
Welcome to episode 36 of the Crownsmen Podcast. I am your host, Jared Downey. My co-host is Gowdy Molina. How are you?
Good.
Good.
And good afternoon.
Yeah, this is, we're getting close to 40 shows. We're covering a lot of different industries. We cover mining, energy, transportation, forestry, agriculture, everything in between. We have some of the shows we have coming up. We hope you to subscribe because some of the topics we're unpacking over the next couple months are going to be everything from the hemp industry to the energy sector, mining. Today we have Chief Dan George in from Burns Lake, the Burns Lake Band. Mm-hmm. He's also the chairman of the First Nation LNG Alliance. He's got other titles we're going to get into when we start the show.
Right.
LNG is a new topic for us on the show, but it's such an important part of the industrial sector that for us, when we started realizing how important it was in global economy, local, everything, but also how much information was missing out there. Just simply people didn't understand how the industry worked, what was going on. So, and that includes me, to be honest. I was pretty uneducated in it. So I wanted to reach out. So we had Brian Cox from BC LNG Alliance on.
Yep.
And the audience really liked that show. And then so we reached out to Chief Dan George, and he agreed to come on the show to then give a different perspective of the LNG industry. So it's just, we're very happy to have him on. Let's first get some sponsors out there.
Yes. We would like to thank all of our sponsors, first off. But we are brought to you by Data Cloud. Does it feel like you're drilling and blasting blind? Could your MWD measurements be better? The Data Cloud platform shows your lithology changes in real time for better blasting and fragmentation profiles. Check out their IoT sensors and cloud computing platform at datacloud.com, and where you can learn how to know your rock today. We're also have just gotten our Crownsmen specials. We've done 2 so far, and that's in our new studio, which I will actually bring up an image for you guys to check it out. And they've been a hit so far. We've got Savanaugh Equipment who came on, and DRA Global as well. So if you're looking to start up, a little, what would you call it? Like
a little online series, web series, or just have a new product to
exactly,
promote.
Products to promote services, projects, that kind of thing. Please let us know, info@crownsmen.com, or visit our website, crownsmen.com.
Okay.
All right.
Perfect. Chief Dan George, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I asked you before the show if you'd done one of these long form. You said you'd been more limited to the short little media clips so far.
Yes, that's usually what the media wants, those 10, 20-second little clips.
Yeah, well, hopefully you like the long form because we're about an hour generally in unpacking stuff. So we're going to sort of walk through everything from some of these boards you sit on, to the projects you're involved with, some of the partnerships. There's so much to cover. I can't imagine we're going to be able to even cover a sliver of it. You've had a long career, but we'll get in as much as we can within the next hour. So let's go through some of your titles. I touched on a couple. You're the chief of Burns Lake. Is that? And I talked to you about the show, and I just wanted to get a little understanding of it. This is actually a fairly new thing I've learned. Is there's hereditary and elected chief, and you're an elected official for Burns Lake, right? Yes,
I'm elected chief. Yes.
Yeah, and the difference of that is just really that a hereditary chief is an actual lineage, right?
Yes, it's been part of our system from time immemorial. Mm-hmm. And elected chiefs came in after the Indian Act and everything else.
Right. And so when were you elected?
I was first counselor in 2010, so I've been in politics for about 9 years now. I've been the chief for the last 5 years. I have election coming up next October.
Oh yeah. So do it all over again.
Time to go over again, yes.
And then chairman of the First LNG Alliance. That you're part of the founding of that as well?
Yeah, yes, I'm one of the founding members that we started this association because we found that a lot of other First Nations were having troubles getting the LNG stuff off the ground. So we started promoting positive and negative things about LNG and just putting that information out there for everybody to look at and make their decisions by themselves. And we also talk about some of the positive things that are student for our nations. So that helps a lot of the other nations look at our website and make their own informed decisions.
Yeah, I'm gonna dig into that a little bit more because there's some really interesting information out there. And you sit on the board for the National Chief Coalition for Energy Projects. What is that?
And that's like another advocacy group that we're promoting energy projects across the country. And one of the projects that we do support is Eagle Spirit Energy. Have you heard about that
I
one?
haven't, no.
Eagle, well, is part of the Enbridge where they want to run an oil line to Prince Rupert.
Oh, yeah.
But Eagle Spirit's got another corridor that's further north because the reason Enbridge's line got so many people were against it was it ran right along the rivers and right through our towns in northern BC, and oil is totally bitumen, I should say, is totally different from different types of oil because bitumen is very heavy and thick and like tar, and it sinks to the bottom. And that pipeline ran right along the Fraser River, and that's our major salmon habitat in the north. And that just decimated all of our salmon because if you've been to the Skeena River, it runs so fast and hard. There's no way that you can clean up bitumen out of a river like that.
So one mistake is just devastating.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you go into you're also, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on in the show too, because you said it's an important thing that you're doing for you, the board of directors for Burns Lake Native Development Corporation.
Yes, it's a First Nation corporation that all 6 First Nations in Burns Lake are the directors of, and we have a First Nation Native logging company is the biggest business that the BLNDC runs.
Oh, I see. And then you also have a housing initiative as well, and that so I want to get into the housing. I want to go back to the First Nations LNG Alliance, Burns Lake agreements, and things like that. But I want to get into that housing initiative as well later because I think that's another important thing. So the First Nation LNG Alliance, it is an advocate. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I want to dig down. It is an advocacy group. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then have you seen? Because you're trying to get this information out there, and have you seen the effects of it already? That you're able to get out the information more effectively, and other bands are able to see the advantages and sort of work through all that because there's so much information out there, right?
Yeah, yes, there is a lot of information out there, but we've been working closely with TransCanada, which is now TC Energy, so they've just changed their name lately, and we also work with the BC government, and they help fund our organization, and we bring out positive information out for them and help them where they're having troubles along the line. We try and be the advocacy group and help with the other First Nations and get them involved and how to be involved and do the right thing for their people.
Right. When you say the challenges, what is sort of is there sort of a set of like the typical ones that you sort of address, or is it varying? The concerns each band has, does it differ a lot on each, or is there some consistent ones that you can identify?
Well, most consistently, I think is people are just misinformed on what LNG is, and they don't understand that we've had this LNG line well, it's a natural gas line, same thing. So it's been heating our town since 1959 in Burns Lake, and it also heats Smithers and runs right to Kitimat.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and and we've never had a problem there. And I know lots of people use the pipeline route or the right of way for recreational purposes, snowmobiling,
Mhm.
quadding, and doing all kinds of other recreational things on that line.
So have you seen working with some of the other bands? So the First Nations LNG Alliance, are you actually going to the other band, other leaders, and laying out this information, or is it more of an online thing? Like, are you face to face dealing with some of these issues and concerns?
Yeah, yes, we have had groups of information senses throughout the province and with the BC government, in conjunction with the BC government, on promoting LNG, and we do that in conjunction with them, and also BC LNG Alliance.
Yeah. Do you think? Yeah, well, that's with Brian Cox, that
Yes,
organization. Yeah.
used to be David Kean, but no, he moved on. So
It happens in these industries. Um, when you first started out with this, how much did you know from how much you know now? Which I know, of course, you've learned a lot. But are you surprised at how much knowledge, even just for you, has come at you when you started down this road?
yes, we've been at this for over 6 years. So
Yeah.
in the first couple years, it's just mind-boggling on all the stuff that we're learning, but now it's like everyday stuff to do and stuff that we know just because we've looked at it for so many years, and it's just edged in your mind. You know exactly what goes into the pipeline. You know about the smart pigs that inspect the line and how to do it right, and a lot of the environmental concerns that we have.
Have you seen the communities that some of them that have been educated on those types of things? Have you seen that shift, that from a majority of the community being against it, it's actually shifted over to supporting it? Like, have you seen that at ground level?
Oh yeah, yeah, lots, especially in the Haida country
Mm,
with Chief Crystal Smith. She's done some great work for her community. Everybody's working. Also, some of my members are working in Kitimat also, because that's where the LNG facility's getting built,
right.
and there's lots of work there and helping all of our First Nation communities in the north, even right now before they even started building the gas line.
Yeah. I don't want to put you on. I don't want to put you on the spot with this question, but I have to. It's something I'm genuinely curious about. When you're in Burns Lake, the surrounding communities, Kitimat, do you feel that side of the story is being told, just through media coverage? And that's because for me, living here, I live here in Vancouver. I'm from the interior, so I certainly have had firsthand experience with the, First Nations community supporting projects and that. I've seen it my whole life. And negotiating and, coming to agreements and sometimes not, and just regular, like any agreement. Do you feel like it's a touch misrepresented on the media a bit? Because I know for me, living in Vancouver, sometimes I'm hearing the stories and I'm thinking there's 20 bands that support this, there's two that don't, but the 20 don't seem to be getting the same amount of sort of representation or airtime, for lack of a better word. Do you think that's true?
I think that's very true, and on what the media portrays, because the media just never portrays anything that's good for people. But we see it all the time, and as part of our First Nation LNG Alliance, that's what we do, is advocate all the good things that is happening to our communities,
Mm-hmm.
and why we're doing it for our communities, and all the good stuff that happened. So, as an advocacy group, same with in Calgary, I speak at lots of energy events in Calgary, and they're always saying, "Well, we never hear nothing good from BC," so they always ask us to come and speak, and we can reinforce to all of the big energy leaders that are in Calgary that there is First Nations that support the LNG industry and the oil industry. But if you really look at the oil industry, everything we do is attached to the oil industry. If we drive a vehicle, we're attached to the oil industry. A lot of the clothes that we wear is part of oil industry.
Yeah.
So there's just no way to get around it, and I just can't see why some people are totally against it, yet everything they do is supporting the oil industry. Like I fly lots, and I know I'm not good for the environment, but that's part of life. But I'm not a hypocrite trying to promote other stuff that's trying to be an environmentalist, and yet you're flying and you're driving an SUV and you're doing all this other stuff that is totally hypocritical from what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I was, I should check my own accuracy on this, but years ago I heard about in Germany, they have the head of their workers' unions actually sits on the board of the management, the board of directors for the companies as well, so that they're seeing all the steps that are being taken. And it seems to me that that's half the battle is when people, if you have somebody that's out and it's just a sort of a protest against everything, they really are actually doing themselves a disservice by not being able to get in the room and be part of building something that's safer, better for the environment, progressing the community, all that sort of stuff. Because I don't know very many people in the energy sector or mining or anything. Like the days of wanting to just, or the forestry sector, just blow down all the trees and just get out of, those days are gone. Maybe in other parts of the world it still happens, but in Canada, I mean, that's not what people want to do. It's just, there's no support for it in any communities. And I think some of the environmental groups, I think they do themselves a disservice by just not being willing to kind of be at that table to actually progress it forward.
Yes, I totally agree. And I believe when you start getting involved with these companies too, you're like steering that ship.
Right, yeah.
And you can steer that ship where you need it to go to protect your spiritual sites and your special interest sites and everything else. But if you're just going to say no, the ship's going to go around you and do whatever it needs to do. So I believe that you need to be part of that, the energy corridor, and you need to be part of whoever's working in your territories to make sure it's
Yeah.
done right. And we also believe in a lot of environmental monitors where our First Nation people are on the ground monitoring the project as it's going along
Yeah.
and making sure it's done right environmentally for us.
Yeah. When being the chief of Burns Lake, I mean, you're right in the thick of these agreements that are being developed. I told you when we were talking on the phone, I think even personally, career-wise, I'm still fairly young in my career. So it really fascinates me. You said you've been in this LNG for about 6 years now. Can you kind of walk a little bit through that day one that this LNG industry is talking with Burns Lake, and now you're at an agreement, and sort of what that whole process is like?
Well, that's been quite the road. At first, like everybody else, we didn't have a clue what it really meant, and then we started talking about it, and then we started going to conferences, and then during the conferences, you learn a lot about it and everything along the line, and the compressor stations, the actual facility that cools it down into liquid form so they can ship it,
Yeah.
and all that stuff along the line. That's a huge learning curve for all of us. But once you get into it, then it seems pretty simple. Actually,
It's that first year where it's just, what is this whole thing? Yeah.
and if you look at it, LNG and natural gas, it heats just about every home in BC, and it also does all of our cooking and all the restaurants and everything around
Yeah.
in southern BC also.
And now it's becoming a global market product that can be exported by British Columbia as well.
Yes, I think the global market is huge, and I believe in what it does to global warming. If we're going to sell to China, we can drop their greenhouse gases in half, which it'll bring up BC's actual greenhouse gases a bit, but globally it'll knock it down a huge amount. And I look at both sides of the picture, pros and cons.
Right.
and especially in the global industry right now with global warming and stuff, China's still burning a lot of coal, and if we change that to natural gas, we could cut the greenhouse gases in half, which is huge for
Unbelievable.
the whole world,
Yeah.
not just Canada, for the world.
Yeah. And if you've ever been to the big cities that have the pollution, oh, it's just, you can feel it, literally feel it on your body when you step out of that airport and you're just like, wow. So what is Burns Lake? What are their agreements? That's a pipeline territory, right? That's not,
Yeah.
there's not a station on there, I don't believe, right?
No. We have an agreement with TC Energy now. It used to be TransCanada, but they just changed their name to TC Energy. So we do have an agreement with them to on yearly benefits. At FID, we got a lump sum money, and once the gas starts flowing, then we'll get a yearly supplement from them.
I
We
see.
also got PBA from provincial government, provincial impact benefits agreement.
Okay.
So we've also done that, and I'm also part of Caris County Tribal Council, and we've negotiated beyond just the PBAs with the provincial government. We have a confidentiality agreement with the province right now, so I can't say nothing
That's
about
fine.
it. But within the next few months, the province should be bringing this out, and it's just huge and mind-boggling on what we've done for our communities on LNG.
That's something I really wanted to understand. From, obviously the dollar amount that's frankly none of our business. But the for the community itself, when you enter into these negotiations and get the results, the projects are going ahead. Burns Lake's about, you said, 5,000 or so in population. What does that mean for a community in development and community buildings and infrastructure and all that, job opportunities for the young people there? Like, what does that actually mean for them?
Well, we've seen the impacts already in my community, and right now I have 4 people unemployed in my community.
For people unemployed?
4 people, and
Oh, you're running for prime minister.
and some of them are long term illnesses that they can't work.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing is on these agreements is getting us out of poverty, because I have a very small band of about 130 people, 76 living on reserve. So what we get per capita basis from ISK is very minimal. So they're making us deal in poverty, and with some of these benefits that we're getting off or the gas company is huge for our community, so we don't have to deliver poverty to our community members.
Yeah. So has job opportunities, excuse me, apologies. Are there job opportunities? Is it the pipelines themselves that the jobs are created, or is it because of the money that comes in, those create different types of jobs like infrastructure and things like that, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit of both, eh? And we're trying to get long-term jobs for our community members, so it's a matter of figuring out what type of training they need.
Yeah.
And we've found that a lot of the problems that we have with some of our members is that through high school and everything else, that schools are pushing them through, and they're not getting the proper education. Like, some people can't even read and write still, and they passed grade 12, and it's just wrong on what's happened to our people. And they get money for our people to sit in seats, and so it's just what they call bums to seats.
Right.
And they get their money from it, and then they push them through school, and they can't even read and write when they're done. So when we look at these long-term jobs, we don't want our people to fail. So we got to train them from day one, and teach them how to read and write, and do a lot of extra stuff for our people. So we're not setting them up to fail. If they're going to take this course, we want them to pass. So
Yeah.
we got to set them up that way too, and it starts with the educational levels too. So
Right.
it's big.
So that's sort of the revenue from that can actually be redirected to sort of basically making sure the education that from the grade 12, if you've already been through grade 12, you can actually be re-educated essentially to be prepared.
Yes. Re-educate them so that they can pass these courses to take long-term jobs,
Right.
like in the compressor stations where
Right.
long-term jobs are going to happen. Building the pipeline is only a 3-year period,
Yeah.
so we want the long-term jobs. So monitoring that line after it's built, and also in the compressor stations where the long-term jobs are.
Right. I wanted to. There's a professional career, and there's the housing initiative. I want to get into the second half. But I wanted to just again circle back to that partnerships with companies and government, and what is that? I've never had that experience of dealing at that level with these companies negotiating that. I mean, what is that like when you're coming into these major deals I mean, you kind of got the weight of the community on your shoulders. I mean, what is that like even personally for you walking into these rooms?
I think that's a real game changer for me, not being in a political role before this, and like being a hands-on guy that does all the work and using my hands all the time,
Yeah.
and then getting into the political where you're just trying to negotiate stuff is a total different realm. But I think over the years and some of the knowledge that we got from doing all this has benefited us greatly
Yeah.
on a lot of the other projects that we are working on. So I think in working with TC Energy too, they have some great people to work with there, and I think that was one of the downfalls of Enbridge was a lot of relationship building and bringing projects forward before. And I've had some discussion with a lot of energy leaders, and they're saying, "How do we get First Nations involved?" I said, I always tell them, bring a project, bring an idea. Don't have an engineered whole project in front of you and drop it on our face,
Yeah.
because we're getting tired of looking at that. And companies just saying, "Here's our project," and they've already engineered, and you're going, "Nope, you can't do it there. That's our special site. You can't do this. You
Right.
can't." And they've wasted a lot of money and energy doing that. So why don't they just come bring us a project and say that we've got this idea. How do you guys want to go about doing this? And then they can start from scratch
Right.
and not have to waste a lot of money on it.
So they're almost overdoing their due diligence.
Yeah.
They're coming and going, we got this beautiful thing all set up, ready to go, and of course we haven't even talked to you yet.
But that was more in the older days,
Right.
and everything has changed in the last 10 years. And it's unreal how that looks nowadays. And especially with the Silcotin case, and where you need consent to cross our lands and to do anything in our lands. And that's all part of it. And I sit on national boards too, and BC's leading the whole country, and we
Yeah.
always have been. And I know why it is. Probably because a lot of us don't have treaties, so we fight for our rights and title every day of our lives. And we just continue to do that, and we continue to fight for all of our title and rights.
Yeah. It's an exciting time for BC. It really is, because there's, I think, like you talked about education, when the more communities, any type of community, is educated and are able to put up a good fight, it pushes everything forward. If there's a general consensus that you do want to move forward, if you get into a situation where it's sort of an argument of whether it's going to go or not. But if it's a discussion, an educated discussion on how it's going to look, I mean, you're going to get a pretty good result. And I think we're starting to see glimmers of that throughout the province now.
Yes, I think it's just a new age, and
Yeah.
there's so much stuff happening for us First Nation leaders here in Alberta, or BC, I should say.
You're on your way to Alberta.
I'm thinking ahead, I guess. Sorry, but yeah, we've been working on this for a few years, and we'll continue to move forward as much as we can.
Yeah, I want to let's give a shout out to the sponsors, and we can get into the second, just your career and this housing initiative that you're part of for the second half.
Yes. Okay. The Crownsmen Podcast is also brought to you by Savannah Equipment. If you need everything from slurry pumps to jaw crushers to ball mills to conveyors, you can go to the leader in used mining equipment, and you can visit them at savannahequipment.com, where you will find more equipment every day. Also brought to you by Streamline. They offer a complete package of fleet management solutions with 3 incredible products: NaviStream, their onboard intelligence and telematics system; NaviLink, their vehicle automation and IoT platform; and Dagama, their dynamic transportation management system. And you can visit them at stti.com for the Streamline advantage. Awesome. I wanted to kind of ask you a couple questions more on the personal side of the topics here. We talked about education. Can you tell us a little bit about your education and kind of where you came from?
Well, I just got grade 11. I don't have grade 12. I've worked for Ministry of Forest for 10 years, and I've taken a lot of courses, and I'm also a certified log scaler, and that's probably one of the hardest courses that you can take in BC. I guarantee you. It's got a 95% failure rate,
Wow.
Wow.
and
Yikes.
so it's huge. You got a binder that big that you got to memorize, and then our final grade on the log scaling was a 4-hour written test and a 5-hour practical test where you scaled a whole load of logs, and then you had to get everything just right. But the biggest thing is memorizing every different type of rot that they have in trees,
Oh my
and
God.
then you gotta put that all on paper and just memorize everything. And so that was a really tough course, even though my educational level is only grade 11. But I've worked for Ministry of Forest for 10 years, and I've taken a lot of courses with them, and I'm very practical. So I've I know how to put things together and fix things, and I can figure stuff out. So it's just part of who I am.
Yeah. You were kind of talking about it off air. You've kind of done a little bit of everything. You've been not just, in the industry or LNG or forestry, but you've done a little bit of here and there. So can you tell us a little bit about what all the other things that you've done?
Okay. Well, my dad gave me a power saw when I was 13 years old, so I went working logging in the bush, and I did that for a number of years. And I've driven 740. I've driven the 966 loader, loaded trucks, and then I went on to firefighting. Also worked for Ministry of Forest for 10 years. I was on the village fire department of Burns Lake for 16 years. I was a captain for 12 years. I'm also a certified training officer for village fire department,
Wow.
and had to resign a couple years ago because I just couldn't keep up with everything else I'm doing because I travel way too much now.
How have you found, being chief? How is that experience for you?
I think it's a great different career move for me, and I think is like any chief too. When you get elected, you get thrown into the fire, and you got to figure out things as you go. So I'm pretty good at that. So I think it worked out very well, and I think politically, I've talked to my other counselors, and they think I'm a great negotiator. So I think a few things I've worked out over the years, and I talk to all the federal governments and provincial governments all the time. So it's learning the ins and outs of all the governments, and even working for like Ministry of Forest for 10 years. You know the ins and outs and the forestry and how they do their business, and that helps in our negotiations too. So everything that you do in your life really helps on part of life.
Yeah, yeah. Have you found, actually, no. What do you see, or what is something that you'd like to see for your community, for your band, that as chief you'd like to kind of help that happen?
Well, I want us to see our band be economically sufficient and don't need any more federal funds ever, and become self-sufficient and be on our own. I also built a hotel a couple of years ago in Burns Lake called KO Lodge, so it's been up and running for 2 years. We have about 80% occupancy rate, which is fairly good for a new hotel, and it's on reserve, 100% owned by Burns Lake Band also.
That's wonderful. Wow.
Does so that sort of project, how does something like that come into it? Is that the location you look and go like how does that something like the a hotel come into play?
Well, when we were looking at LNG too, we were looking at maybe doing a modular line business to get into building some of the camps there.
Right.
But then we started thinking about the hotel idea. And as the previous chief before me, Albert Giroux, that is his vision, and I just continued that and ran it through to the end.
Right.
But it is 3 years of a lot of negotiations with Britco when we were doing it. So it didn't happen overnight. It's a long-term thing, just like everything else you do in First Nation communities. Nothing happens overnight.
Right.
No, of course not.
I wanted to, going a little more into this housing initiative. Can you just tell us a little? I think there's a website, and we'll bring that up, even in the post. What is that project? A little more about it. I know you said when we were talking, I ask guests a lot of times if there's something specific they want to talk, and that's the first thing that you brought up. So it's called the Housing Infrastructure Council. Is that right?
We are the council that is building the authority. Yes.
Oh, okay. So why was that founded? And what is the mandate of it?
Well, is founded because the federal government asked me years ago that is like First Nations need to take control of their own housing. How can we do this? And I was actually in Ottawa and talking about some other projects, and one of the guys there from ISK found out as a building inspector, I guess, and so he started asking me all these housing questions, and it totally switched that meeting from our sustainable communities that we were going after some federal dollars for, and it went to a housing conversation there.
No.
And my friends are going, "What? How did you take over this meeting?" I was like, I don't know, but word got around. And so if you look at federally, they have legislation that ISK is going to disband themselves.
Sorry, what is ISK?
Indigenous Services Canada.
Oh, okay.
Used to be INAC a few years back.
Okay, yeah.
So they've changed their name to ISK. So
Okay.
through legislation, they're designed to disband themselves. So
Awesome.
I started up a First Nation Housing Infrastructure Council in BC, and we're the entity that's going to build the authority in BC.
Oh, I see.
So we're not going to actually run it. We're just building the authority. So, and through that federal legislation, and our mandates came from the BCAFN. We've got a mandate from BCAFN. We've got one from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. We also got one from the Summit, and we also got support from the Leadership Council.
Oh.
Which is all three of the entities together. Excuse me.
That's okay.
So, yeah, and so we've got the mandates from all the chiefs in BC, and as a chief myself too, and before we even started this council, I felt we need to get all the chiefs involved because this is going to be a lot of work, and if all the other chiefs don't want to support it, there's no use us doing all this work. So we've been at it for 2 years now.
Right.
I've got some housing meetings in the next couple of weeks. But federally, we've got an MOU also with the federal government to do this. And once the government changes, it doesn't matter which government comes in, but we'll continue to do our work. And as soon as the government changes, we're gonna go get an agreement in principle. That's our next avenue, AIP with the federal government.
So just from it's new to me, so I'm just trying to understand. So the funding, is this in a practical sense? What's the start and what's the end result? Is this to like for the funding for the council? is that then going to fund projects within communities, or is it going to help plan the projects? A bit of both. What's sort of the full function of it?
Well, the full function is totally taking over ISK and putting all the First Nation services under the authority. The
Okay.
council's not running it; the authority's going to run it.
Right.
Right.
So we're building the authority.
Okay.
And what I feel our involvement is to make sure that we've done a lot of advocacy outside to all the communities throughout BC, and our mandate's going to be to make sure that everything that we've got from all the people get into the authority itself before we disband ourselves, and making sure that we can change it to something that all First Nations need in BC, and how do we make it better? How do we make the services from ISK better than what they are now?
Yeah.
Because if we're not going to make it better, what's the use of doing it?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you're just changing hands to
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So what would go under this for infrastructure? Would that would schools that are built on the band and things like that, would that go under that, or like what kind of projects goes under that?
Well, that's part of the infrastructure part, and we're still figuring out a lot of that, and how much is going to stay in Infrastructure Canada, and how much is part of ISK. So we're still working on that structure of it, and I know the infrastructure. I think either one thing in your reserve or everything could be part of infrastructure. So it's
Right.
hard to decipher exactly which one and define which one is right now.
Right.
But as we get into the agreement and principle and that, we'll figure it out with the federal government together, because this has never been done before. So as we got in, we thought that they were stalling us, but they've never done this either. So we're working it out together now, and we've realized that, oh, they don't know how to do this either.
Right.
So that was what the problem was. They weren't stalling us. It's just that we got to work together and figure this out together.
Yeah, and I guess this sort of sets a precedent for, because this is provincially, but that sort of sets a precedent for what potentially could be across Canada then.
Yes, every First Nation across Canada is going to be doing this eventually.
Right.
BC's just leading the way, and we're going to run into all the hiccups, and we'll make sure that everybody else knows what to do and what not to do.
Right. It's it must be a huge undertaking, though. It must just be. I mean, I can't even kind of think of where to start with that sort of project. It's just like on a timeline. Is this like a 10 years out, 2 years out? What sort of, is there a projected, or you just sort of work through it and progress it as fast as you can, sort of thing?
Well, like I said, we've been working on it for 2 years now, and our timeline's in another 2 years that
Okay.
we'll take it over. So we're pretty ambitious, and BC's always been compared to the rest of the country. And like I said, I also sit on the National Chiefs Committee on housing infrastructure too, where we have chiefs from every province and territory that sit on this board, and we discuss our housing problems nationally too. So, and
Yeah.
we're also trying to gather information on nationally, so that everybody asks the same questions and we get the same information, so we can compile all that information a lot easier than everybody doing their own thing in each province.
Right, because right now it's not, because there's not that council. Each band has to individually go basically to the federal government for those kind of infrastructure projects. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this sort of centralizes it to, if there's one in BC and then there's one in, let's say, Alberta, and then down the line. Now it's more on the ground. It's going to be more practical for if a small band out in one of the remote areas comes through, that council will have a better understanding practically of what they're actually asking for, what their needs are, sort of like that. Is that sort of one of the improvements that can be made?
Yes, and there are a lot of small bands in BC.
Yeah.
With very few members, so capacity is a huge thing on a lot of the bands too, right? Because everything too, that funding comes from ISK is all set in a pot, and then they want everybody to fight over it, and you got to do proposals for it, and a lot of the bands don't have the capacity to do all those proposals,
Right.
and it's
yeah.
usually in very short time that you got one or
These
2 weeks to
funding
do it.
windows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we improve that, and how do the First Nations want us to improve that? And one of the things that we've learned too is that they want us to help them do
Hmm.
this. So that's another thing that we're thinking about on, especially the authority. And how do you want the authority to run? Do you want regional offices or maybe satellite offices that
Hmm.
can go into the communities and help the smaller communities?
Yeah.
And so we've been thinking about that. We're also been thinking a lot about off reserve. So one of our new directors is a professional on homelessness, and she works off reserve, and so we've got her into the loop. So we're also trying to integrate. How do we? Because just about every First Nation, half our members don't live on reserves. So how do we help them out? They're
Right.
still our
Yeah.
members, no matter where they live. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so we still got to help them too. So we're still working on a lot of those little issues, but we'll continue to try and develop something really good for BC.
Is it one of those things when you start a project like this? It's kind of like you don't know what you don't know, and you start going down this road, and then all of a sudden you realize there's an opportunity. Like you're saying, half the members are off reserve, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's an opportunity now for this. It's sort of kind of open your eyes to all the opportunities within it once you sort of start down a road. I'm sure you didn't think of all these things from day one, right?
Oh yeah. But I actually from day one, yeah, we did want to help our members off reserve, but we didn't know how to go about it.
Right.
And then we got another board. We had to hire some more directors because a couple of guys resigned and through to some illnesses and stuff. So we need to get, and then we started. It's like, where do we need? What kind of people do we need? We need one on homelessness, one for off reserve, and finance. So we've got special groups of people as part of our directors
Yeah.
that. Um, we can look at and get information off them that we can use in our group.
Yeah. Are you on some of the other shows, in the mining shows and things that we do, young people are obviously a big talking point. In mining industry, for example, there was this gap where you had sort of the 60s and up, and then you had sort of this chasm that wasn't filled. Are you in all these projects, these councils, these alliances? Are you able to get the young people, the under 30s, kids just coming out of high school? Are you able to get them involved in a tangible way?
We have been trying. We do have a youth advocate as part of our council, and we are looking right now. We are looking for another youth member to be part of our council, so we can have that youth voice in there. And if there's any youth forums that are happening in BC, we could send them there, and they can have a face to face with the youth because they are youth, and it looks better not us older guys talking to the youth.
Well, in that leadership, right? Building up the because it is the leadership of tomorrow, right?
Yes, and we want to teach them young too because it's all about healthy living in your homes too, and you got to teach them while they're young,
Yeah.
and how to take care of your homes
What
is
do
a
you,
big thing.
yeah, what do you for you from when you were, in your 15 to 20 and that what do you is there a difference do you see from opportunity for the youth today as opposed to when you were, or is there less opportunity? What do you sort of see?
Well, when I was a youth, I never lived on reserve myself for the
Mm.
first 35 years of my life.
Oh,
So I know how it is to be off reserve. I know what rent is, and I know what security deposits that we need to rent a house and take care of our families. Because I got 3 kids and 7 grandkids, so I've learned
seven.
7
That'll
grandkids.
keep you
Yes.
busy. That's what all the traveling's for.
Yeah, yeah.
So that so do you when you look at them, so yeah, and that's well, you said 50% of members live off reserve. So for you growing up now, do you when you are you living on the reserve now?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you see for kids that are growing up on the reserves, is there an extra challenge, or does it provide more opportunity, or how do you sort of look? I mean, I also understand asking that question, that Burns Lake is very different from the neighboring band and everything like that. So I guess specifically within Burns Lake, is there that opportunity for youth?
I think there's lots of opportunity for youth on reserve. Lots of opportunity, more than what I had when I was growing up off reserve.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have all these funding organizations that we could get money off of to go to school. We had to scrimp and save and do what we needed to do to survive.
Yeah.
And that's part of life, and that makes us who we are.
Yeah. Do you try to pass it on now that you're back? You know, you're in Burns Lake. Do you try to sort of pass that sense of responsibility and, you know, sort of the grind, for lack of a better word? Do you try to get that, sort of impose that into the next generation?
Yeah, yes, I totally believe in leading by example. So I built my own house in '92 on reserve. I also did all my own plumbing, all my own electrical. I read electrical code book and said you could do this, and I was like, yeah, I think I could do that. So hasn't burned down yet, so I think I might have did a pretty good job. So
You're one of those people that I sit there and watch work, because I've worked in the construction, but I'm just a completely unnatural at it, and I don't know what it is. Probably impatience. It's probably my biggest downfall. And I just go, how in the world did you figure that out? I don't buy from won't even, like, people will say something like IKEA, and I will not buy because I don't want to do the step.
yeah.
I want to find the little old lady with this wooden furniture and just put in my truck and take home, you know?
Yep, and another thing I'm talking about leading by example too is after I built my own house, I paid it off about 6 years ago, and I'm the only member on my reserve that has paid off their own house.
Yeah. And that example is that does set a platform for what can be. You know, it's the same as when you see, you know, stars that, you know, accomplish things in sports or music or sciences or whatever. That example, it can just be an inspiration to people, and you never really know who's watching and who's being influenced by it.
Yeah, and it's great to be a role model for the
Yeah.
people. And we're having an AGA next month, so we'll have a lot of big discussions there too.
Yeah, as we're wrapping up the show, and I just, you and I haven't met. You haven't met Gowdy until today.
Yeah.
It's quite an honor for us that guests come in. They take time out of their day. I know you're traveling and off to meetings. You were at a meeting this morning. Now you're off to a dinner and everything like that. So I just want to say thanks for, you know, not really knowing us, but coming on, taking the time. You know, this long form, as much as we have fun, it is also, because it's unedited, you're going to just say what you say, and it's encouraging. I always say that I think honest people come on this show, because people that don't want, we've had some people that are like, no, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it says something, I think, about people that are willing to come on and really unpack issues with us. So I appreciate that.
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me also. And another thing I'd like to say also is when I've been asked to comment on TMX Line 2 before by media, and it's like, sorry, that's not my territory. You have no right to say anything about it. It's somebody else's territory. And I believe that every First Nation has the right to do what they need to do on their territories to help their people.
Right.
It's nobody else's business to come into our territories and start protesting. Like, I'd never do that to anybody else, because that is not my role as chief of the Burns Lake. My role is to help my people, and that's it, and not to advocate anything else.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And again, I think leading by example, I think that makes a difference. And when people see the success of that type of thinking, I think then that will spur on more of that, you know.
You bet.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
We're going to wrap up right over to here.
Yep.
Okay, sales pitch. People subscribe, share, comment. Go.
Yes. Wow. That felt like you were trying to rush me.
Not at all, actually. We've got time. Take as much time as you
No,
need.
definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got an episode every week, or usually every week. sometimes there's, technical difficulties or that.
Yeah, sometimes
But
2 a week. It all depends.
yeah, sometimes it's 1 a week, sometimes it's 2 a week. We also have our Crownsmen special, so please subscribe so you can check those out.
Yeah.
Or if you want your own to promote your products, services, projects, please email us info@crownsmen.com. Visit our website, crownsmen.com. You can find all the information on there. What else? You can also listen to the podcast if you don't want to watch it while you're driving or anything like that on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Pocket
And-
Casts, pretty
Oh,
much
you're still
anywhere.
going? Okay. And the Facebook group that's a
Yes.
fun place. That's sort of the free for all spot. We share like highlights and comments, sometimes contests. It's just a fun place to be. Most people on Facebook, so join us on there. Just look up the Crownsmen Podcast. That group will come up.
Yep.
We all upload highlights onto Instagram and everything. So
Yeah.
check us out.
So follow us.
Yep.
Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, all at Crownsman P.
And feedback on the show, suggestions for guests, everything like that. We want to talk to you. It's an honor for us to have these guests. Thank you, Chief Dan George, for joining us and taking time out of a very busy schedule to sit down and talk to us. We appreciate it. We appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next episode.